the team.
One of the things that's become part of everybody's vocabulary is Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about, again, this idea of staying connected, one of the ways that we're starting to see people do that is using a technology that's not new. It's been around for a while, but they're using it much more frequently in two areas. And I'd be interested in your observation about both. One would be the kind of team meetings, the sales meetings.
Mm-hmm.
There's anything particular there that sales managers ought to be thinking about. And the second would be for bankers who are now in a position to make sales calls using Zoom.
Yep. So I think there are a few things to be careful about, and I will display some of the bad characteristics of it in this as well. But I think one is first understand the technology.
Yeah.
You know, understand things. If you want to share a screen, how you do that. And what you have visible on your computer. If you want to pass control of the screen to somebody else, do that. You don't know how many meetings I've sat in over the last 3 weeks where we spend half our time trying to figure out how to do these things. So you know, it becomes a distraction, and we actually lose focus. So the first thing is master the technology of things like sharing screens, passing control of the screen to somebody else, so on and so forth. Two is I think there's been a tendency, because we work from home, we are perhaps less formal than we might be in an office environment. You know, so you know, it's not if I don't, you know, when I go to my local bank and so on and so forth, you know, most of them are still wearing coats and ties, and or at least dressing more business appropriate. And then all of a sudden you see the same people on a home meeting in Zoom or one of the other services, you know, and they're in a torn t-shirt or something like that. So I think maintain both a professional image yourself. I mean, right now, if I stood up, you'd see I have track shorts on, but from the waist up, I try and look somewhat professional, and also be attentive to your background. It's so funny, you know, you start hearing. I was on a conference call with an EVP of sales for a very, very large company the other day. And, you know, I said, Kevin, do you play the guitar? Because he had a whole line of guitars behind him. And we had a really interesting conversation. I knew, didn't know something about him, but in his home office, he had a whole bunch of guitars lined up, and we had a great conversation about that. But realize that everybody's looking at, you know, your office, and they're curious about it. So be attentive to what people are seeing. Make sure what they're seeing is what you want them to be seeing.
Right.
And make sure also that it isn't distracting.
Yeah, those are great answers. So I guess when you look at how this could be utilized in sales calls, and one of the things that I think is a positive about the current environment is that people are picking up the phone more often, which I think is important. I've got a few stories about people who, instead of responding to the email, which might have been how they would have done it in the past, they pick up the phone and call the person and find out what the real issue is. And sometimes that's something people ought to be thinking about. But when it comes to using Zoom in a sales call, a lot of the stuff you talked about is critical. You have to understand how the technology works. You have to be dressed appropriately. Is there anything else that a salesperson should be thinking about in a Zoom call as opposed to a phone call?
No, I think we ought to be trying to use Zoom more and more and more. It's interesting. I've used Zoom in similar technologies virtually since those technologies have been available. It's interesting is only in the last few weeks have people started turning on their cameras.
Yeah.
Usually we use it just for voice connection. I was on the phone yesterday with a client in Stockholm, and we have weekly calls, and we've had weekly calls for about the last year on things. And you know, he was saying, you know, and we always used Zoom, but we always used it to present pipelines or account plans and things like that. So we were focused on what was on our computer screen. And, you know, I always had my camera on. And when he came on, this was the first time ever he had his camera on. And he said, Dave, you know, you know, it's good to see you, because normally we only see each other when we're meeting face to face, which is maybe 5 times a year, but we have these weekly calls. So people are using the cameras more, which I think is very positive. And also, so I would try and use it. I would try and use the cameras more. One thing you said that I've noticed quite a bit about, and I think it's this feeling of being disconnected and isolated. Customers are picking up the phone.
Yeah.
They're responding to phone calls because they're in the same situation we are, is that they feel disconnected. So this is a time where if ever you're doing prospecting, if you're looking to build relationships, whether it's through Zoom or picking up the phone, more and more people are answering the phone and not responding electronically like they may have before on an email or something, or not even responding. Is they feel isolated, they want to be connected, and they'll even talk to a banker trying to sell them something.